Imagine a 10-year-old child, right? And their parents have just filed for divorce.
Okay.
So society looks at that broken home, the moving boxes, the custody schedules, and everyone just assumes the chaos of the divorce is what's causing the child's sudden, explosive behavioral issues.
Right. That's the standard assumption.
But what if the clinical data tells us the exact opposite? Like, what if the child's hidden, undiagnosed biology, stretching all the way back to infancy, actually broke the marriage?
I mean, it forces a complete inversion of how we view family dynamics, doesn't it?
It really does.
We instinctively put the parents' choices at the center of the universe. We assume the child is just, well, a satellite reacting to their gravity.
Yeah.
But the reality we are unpacking today shows that an infant's unregulated nervous system possesses enough gravitational pull to literally tear a family structure apart.
Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we are tracing a staggering, lifelong cascade.
A really heavy one.
Yeah. We are looking at what happens when abnormal behaviors in babies and toddlers are ignored or misunderstood or just mislabeled by their caregivers.
Right.
We're going to explore how those early missed signals mutate into severe behavioral disorders by childhood, how they fracture family dynamics leading to parental separation, and ultimately, how they hardwire a child's biology for a lifetime of chronic physical and mental illness.
And to map out this entire chain reaction, we are synthesizing a massive stack of clinical material today.
Huge stack.
Yeah, we are looking at pediatric guidelines, deep developmental psychology research, the CDC's findings on adverse childhood experiences, what we call ACEs.
Right, the ACEs.
Exactly. Along with psychiatric diagnostic criteria and some really cutting-edge longitudinal studies on family stability and the human microbiome.
So whether you are a parent trying to decipher your toddler or someone who plans to have kids, or honestly, if you just want to understand why the adults around you operate the way they do, consider this your literal shortcut to the blueprint of human behavior.
Absolutely.
So let's start at year 0, decoding an infant. Because if you've spent any time around toddlers, you know they are famous for being, frankly, a little unhinged.
Oh, completely unhinged. Yeah.
Right. So how do we even establish a baseline for what is abnormal when normal includes, screaming because a banana was peeled wrong?
Well, establishing that baseline is the most critical first step. Normal toddler pushback is chaotic, sure, but it has a developmental purpose.
Right.
Like saying no to everything is just a child mapping the boundaries of their independence.
It's them figuring out they're a separate person.
Exactly. And making a massive smeared mess with their food, that isn't an attempt to ruin your evening. It's a necessary tactile exploration to build fine motor skills.
Which is exhausting for the parents, but normal.
Right. Even the classic trope of repeatedly dropping a cup from a high chair, that is an experiment in cause and effect. Gravity is a brand new concept to a 1-year-old.
They're like little scientists running physics experiments.
Yeah.
Like, if I drop this, does it fall every time? Let's run the trial again. Yes. Fascinating.
Yeah, that's exactly what they're doing. And normal tantrums are simply huge emotional surges inside tiny biological vessels. They do not yet possess the neurological hardware, specifically the prefrontal cortex development, to actually regulate themselves.
Because that part of the brain is literally not built yet.
Right. But the clinical literature draws a sharp line between these developmental milestones and genuine red flags.
Okay, so what are the red flags?
Irritability is a prime diagnostic indicator. And we aren't talking about a baby who is fussy because they missed a nap.
Not just cranky.
No, the medical definition here involves chronic incessive crying, a distinct high-pitched vocalization that differs entirely from a standard hunger cry.
Oh, wow.
And it comes with a profound inability to settle even when every single basic need is met.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because we usually assume a chronically crying, quote-unquote, difficult baby is either physically sick or just unlucky in the temperament department.
Right, that's the cultural narrative.
But there is a massive curveball in the developmental psychology research here that completely changed how I view early childhood. And that is the phenomenon of the high IQ baby.
Yes, what's fascinating here is how often cognitive advancement masquerades as a behavioral problem.
Wait, really?
Oh, yeah. Highly intelligent infants are essentially hyper-receivers. They are hypersensitive to their environment because their early social cognition is incredibly advanced.
So they're taking in way more data than a typical baby.
Exactly. They aren't just registering faces. They are reading the emotional undercurrents of a room. They detect micro shifts in a parent's vocal tone or physical tension.
So, If an aunt comes over and the parents are secretly stressed about this visit but trying to put on a polite face, the baby might absolutely lose their mind and reject the aunt.
Precisely.
And the parents think, why is my kid being so difficult?
Yeah.
When in reality, the baby is just reacting to the invisible tension the adults are trying to hide.
They are reading the room with more accuracy than the adults.
That is wild.
And this cognitive leap creates another specific behavior noted in the research. They call it frustration before expected age.
Right. I want you listening to picture this. A baby is sitting on the floor with a mechanical toy.
Okay.
A cognitively advanced infant develops causal reasoning, the understanding of if I do A, B should happen much earlier than their peers.
Right.
So they perform an action on the toy expecting a very specific mechanical outcome. And when the cheap plastic toy fails to deliver that outcome, the baby has an absolute meltdown.
And the parent just sees a tantrum over a toy. But the baby's brain is experiencing the violation of a calculated physical law.
It's an existential crisis for them.
Yes, the frustration isn't malice, it's highly intelligent, localized feedback. Their executive function is basically writing checks their motor skills an environment can't cash.
I love that phrasing.
And another hallmark here is deferred imitation. An average baby might mimic a smile in real time, but a highly intelligent baby will watch a parent say, use a tool to fix a hinge, store that complex sequence of actions, and then attempt to reproduce it perfectly days later when they encounter a similar physical problem.
If you're listening to this and suddenly reevaluating memories of your toddler staring a hole through you before throwing a fit, you might need to give yourself some grace.
Absolutely.
You weren't necessarily doing something wrong. You might have just been dealing with a hypersensitive little genius. But what happens if a parent doesn't realize this?
Well, that's where the trouble starts.
Like, what if they just label this deeply analytical, sensitive baby as difficult or colicky and just try to shut down the crying without engaging the intellect?
That misinterpretation is the first domino falling in our cascade.
The first domino.
Yeah. When advanced cognitive needs are pathologized as mere behavioral problems, the parent's response shifts from engagement to management.
Oh, that's a sad distinction.
It is. The child learns early on that their complex internal state is completely invisible to their caregiver. They feel chronically misunderstood.
Which brings us into murky territory. Because if a 2-year-old chucks a wooden block at my head, how do I know if it's a normal phase, a sign of high intelligence testing physics, or the first red flag of a lifelong behavioral disorder?
The differentiator is frequency, intensity, and the child's ability to recover.
Okay.
But more importantly, the clinical focus shifts to how the environment responds to that block being thrown. This is where we cross into the absolute core of human development.
The attachment system.
Exactly. The cascade accelerates when parents consistently ignore, misinterpret, or mismanage these early cues. It creates what the literature calls micro-ruptures in attunement.
Micro-ruptures. To really grasp what a micro-rupture is, we have to look at the still face experiment conducted by Dr. Edward Tronick.
Yes, it remains one of the most haunting and foundational experiments in developmental psychology.
It's so hard to watch.
The setup is simple, right? A mother and her infant are interacting playfully. There is mutual joy, eye contact, vocal synchronization.
Very normal baby-mom interaction.
Right. Then the researcher instructs the mother to turn away, and when she turns back to face the baby, she holds a completely blank, expressionless face.
The footage is visceral. The baby immediately registers the shift. They deploy every tool they have to re-engage the mother.
They try so hard.
They really do. They smile, they point, they screech, they wave their arms. And when the mother remains impassive, you just watch the baby's nervous system hit the panic button.
The stress hormone, cortisol, visibly spikes.
They physically thrash, just start wailing, and then, devastatingly, they just collapse inward. They turn their body away, giving up entirely.
It takes less than 2 minutes for the infant to completely dysregulate. 2 minutes.
Wow.
Now, map that experimental design onto the modern living room.
And smartphone.
Yes. When a parent is physically sitting on the floor with their child, but their attention is entirely captured by a screen, their face mimics that exact blank, unresponsive state.
That makes sense, yeah.
To an infant's neurology, a caregiver who is emotionally absent due to severe clinical postpartum depression and a caregiver who is scrolling social media look functionally identical.
Okay, I have to push back here because that sounds incredibly alarmist.
I get that.
Are you saying that a modern parent checking an urgent work email or texting their spouse is traumatizing their baby and causing the equivalent of clinical depression? Because no one can be 100% attuned 24 hours a day.
That is a crucial distinction, and the developmental data is very clear here. Perfect attunement is not the goal, nor is it possible.
Okay, phew.
Right. A single instance or even daily brief instances of a still face do not cause trauma.
So what's the danger?
The danger lies in chronicity. If a blank, unresponsive screen face is the dominant pattern of interaction across thousands of hours, it programs the infant's nervous system to expect a void where a connection should be. The micro-ruptures accumulate.
And the sources detail other ways this attachment system gets stressed too. There is a lot of clinical observation regarding prolonged separation before a baby's brain can developmentally tolerate object permanence.
Yes, separation is a massive factor.
And just to be clear to you listening, we are not taking a societal or political stance here on dual-income households, maternity leave policies, or the necessity of daycare. We are strictly looking at the biological reality of an infant's nervous system as reported by developmental researchers.
Right. The biological reality is that pushing the limits of separation, whether a parent is traveling extensively for a high-demand career or relying heavily on long hours of institutional care, it stresses the attachment framework.
Because the baby doesn't have the context.
Exactly. An infant does not have the cognitive capacity to understand that you are at an office working to pay for their formula.
Right.
Their reality is binary. My primary survival figure is either here or they are gone.
I like to visualize the baby's developing nervous system like a continuously running flight data recorder on an airplane.
That's a great analogy.
It is logging thousands of micro-interactions every single day. It is constantly running an algorithm like, who sees me? Who prioritizes my distress? Does my environment respond to my signals?
Constantly gathering data.
Right. And based on that massive data set, it writes the underlying code for how that human will experience trust, love, and safety for the rest of their life.
And if the flight data recorder logs a consistent pattern of I am not prioritized or my signals do not yield a response, the baby has to adapt to survive.
They don't just stay in distress forever.
No, they develop an insecure attachment strategy. And it's important to note, these are not diseases. They are brilliant, albeit tragic, survival mechanisms deployed by an immature brain trying to manage overwhelming anxiety.
The clinical literature outlines 3 primary insecure strategies. Let's start with avoidant attachment. What does that look like?
In an avoidant framework, when a parent returns after a long absence or a period of emotional unavailability, the child actively turns away.
They ignore them.
Yes. They might focus obsessively on a toy and ignore the caregiver. The internal logic is, my environment is unresponsive. Relying on this caregiver causes me pain. Therefore, I must shut down my attachment needs and cope entirely on my own.
It's a form of learned helplessness.
Exactly.
And the longitudinal data tracking these avoidant babies into adulthood shows a massive correlation with chronic depression. They learn to suppress their needs so deeply that they disconnect from their own emotional landscape.
The second strategy is ambivalent attachment, and this presents as the complete opposite.
Okay, how so?
When the caregiver returns, the child clings to them for dear life and absolutely cannot be soothed no matter what the parent does.
Because their internal algorithm determined that the caregiver is wildly unpredictable. Like, you are here now, but you might vanish in 5 seconds, so I have to fuse myself to you or I won't survive.
To understand the physical drive behind this clinging, we look back to the famous Harry Harlow experiments with rhesus monkeys in the 1950s.
Oh, the wire mother study.
Yes. Infant monkeys were separated from their mothers and given a choice between a wire mother equipped with a bottle of milk and a soft cloth mother that provided no food at all.
The monkeys overwhelmingly chose the cloth mother. They would reach over to the wire mother just long enough to drink, but they spent all their time desperately clinging to the cloth.
It proved that tactile comfort and perceived security are as fundamental to survival as caloric intake.
That's incredible.
Decades later, Michael Meaney's research on rats demonstrated that mothers who physically lick and groom their pups actually alter the pup's stress responses at a biological level.
Like it changes their DNA expression.
Yes. When a human infant is deprived of that consistent, soothing attunement, they become highly neurotic. They develop a hypervigilant, ambivalent attachment style that correlates heavily with severe youth anxiety.
Which leaves the third strategy, and the sources indicate this is the most destructive and difficult to treat, right? Disorganized attachment.
It is. Avoidant and ambivalent children, while suffering, have at least formulated a predictable coping strategy.
They have a plan.
Exactly. The disorganized child has no strategy because their nervous system is in a state of total collapse.
Why does that happen?
This often occurs when the caregiver is not just absent, but actively frightening. When the parent enters the room, the child might cycle rapidly between trying to cling, running away, freezing in place, or even becoming violently enraged and hitting the caregiver.
It's an impossible biological paradox.
Yeah.
The exact person their DNA tells them to run toward for safety is the same person their brain is telling them to run away from in terror.
The psychological toll of that paradox is immense. Long-term studies show disorganized attachment is heavily correlated with borderline personality disorder, self-harming behaviors, and acute mental illness crises in adolescence.
Their baseline operational state is chaos.
Pure chaos.
So let's track the cascade. We have a baby whose flight data recorder has logged an unpredictable, unresponsive, or chaotic environment. They survive infancy using one of these maladaptive strategies.
Right.
They grow into a toddler, then a young child. What happens when these foundational attachment injuries are left untreated?
The inability to regulate emotions begins to metastasize. The child's internal chaos spills out into their environment.
It doesn't just stay inside them anymore.
No. By elementary school, we start seeing clinical diagnoses that go far beyond the realm of normal defiance. The first major milestone in this cascade is oppositional defiant disorder, or ODD.
The DSM defines ODD as a persistent pattern, lasting at least 6 months, characterized by angry, irritable moods, and vindictive behavior.
And we need to be clear, this isn't a kid complaining about eating broccoli.
Right. This is a child who actively and aggressively defies adult requests, deliberately sets out to annoy and provoke other people, and reflexively blames everyone else for their own mistakes.
And ODD is heavily comorbid with ADHD attention deficit hyperactivity disorder.
Oh, that makes it so much harder.
When you combine the two, you have a highly volatile mix. ADHD involves severe deficits in executive function, specifically impulse control and sustained attention. Repetitive, mundane tasks are not just boring to these children, they are neurologically agonizing.
They lack the internal braking system. If an impulse fires, the action happens simultaneously. There's no gap.
Precisely. So when a child with an insecure attachment style, who already distrusts authority, experiences the physical frustration of an ADHD brain being forced to do something it cannot tolerate, the result is aggressive, explosive defiance.
The clinical guidelines also bring up another diagnosis in this escalation: disruptive mood dysregulation disorder, or DMDD. How did that differ from a child who just has ODD and ADHD?
The MDD is a relatively newer classification, and it captures a specific type of suffering. It is characterized by severe, recurrent temper outbursts, verbal or behavioral rages that are grossly out of proportion to the situation.
Okay.
But the crucial differentiator is the child's baseline mood. A child with ODD might be totally fine when they are getting their way.
Right, they can be charming.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A child with DMDD is chronically, persistently irritable and angry nearly every day, all day long.
And the sources note something incredibly sad about DMDD. These children often feel deep remorse after an outburst.
Yes.
They aren't sociopathic. They're victims of their own massive emotional surges. They simply do not possess the language to articulate the storm inside their head. So the violence, the screaming, the destruction, that is their language.
It is their only mechanism for communicating distress.
Wow.
But understanding that doesn't make living with it any easier. This is where the cascade begins to fracture the family structure. To understand how these behaviors become entrenched, we have to look at Dr. Russell Barkley's model of the coercion cycle.
Let's break this down. Walk us through a typical Tuesday morning in a house caught in this cycle.
Okay, it starts with a standard parental directive. The parent says, "Please put your shoes on, it's time for school."
Simple enough.
The child, who is highly dysregulated, immediately escalates. They refuse, they scream, perhaps they throw the shoe across the room.
And the parent.
The parent, who is likely already operating on a sleep deficit, stressed by work and dreading this exact battle, initially tries to enforce the boundary. They raise their voice, they threaten a punishment.
And then the child matches that energy and raises the stakes. They start kicking the wall.
Exactly. The escalation reaches a point where the exhausted parent simply cannot sustain the fight. They back down just to stop the screaming. They say, "Fine, just get in the car in your socks, I don't care anymore."
So the parent thinks they just survived a battle. But what did the child's brain just learn?
The child learned a highly effective operational strategy. Their brain logged the data. When I am faced with a demand I do not like, Extreme aggression and defiance are the fastest tools to force the adults to remove the demand.
The coercion was successful.
The parent inadvertently rewarded the explosive behavior.
And when you multiply that Tuesday morning by hundreds of interactions over years, it completely warps the child's worldview. The clinical data notes that these children can even develop a form of paranoia as they get older. They begin a process of hostile attribution bias.
Yes, this is where the child starts attributing malicious intent to the completely innocent behaviors of others.
Give me an example.
If a classmate accidentally bumps their shoulder in the hallway, the child doesn't perceive it as an accident. Their brain, wired by conflict, assumes it was a deliberate attack designed to humiliate them, and they react with explosive violence.
Because their entire foundational experience of human relationships is built on coercion, dominance, and a fundamental lack of safety.
Exactly.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. As I'm reading these pediatric guidelines and psychological studies, a massive question keeps surfacing. Who is at fault here?
That's the big one.
Is the parent's stress, depression, and poor discipline causing the child's psychopathology? Or is the child's extreme, biologically driven behavior utterly destroying the parent's mental health?
It's the most agonizing question in pediatric psychology, and the literature is definitive. The relationship is bidirectional. It is a mutually reinforcing doom loop.
A doom loop.
Think about the concept of the spillover effect. A mother who is experiencing intense stress, maybe from financial instability, a high-pressure job, or a failing marriage, cannot hermetically seal that stress away from her child.
They pick up on it.
Especially if they share a close bond, the child absorbs that ambient anxiety. Their internalizing or externalizing behaviors worsen.
The child starts acting out more aggressively because they feel the instability.
And that increased aggression drastically spikes the parent's stress levels. The parent's cognitive bandwidth shrinks, their patience evaporates, and their ability to parent effectively collapses.
They fall back on the coercion cycle.
Exactly. The parent's compromised state worsens the child's behavior, which in turn further degrades the parent's mental health.
Which brings us to the breaking point, the specific focus of this deep dive, the collapse of the family unit. Because maintaining a facade of normalcy under this level of chronic daily warfare is impossible.
It hollows out the family from the inside. We have incredibly compelling data on this from LSA, the English Longitudinal Study of Aging.
Okay, what did they find?
Researchers didn't just look at behavior. They looked at the causal impact of a child's genetic risk for ADHD and severe behavioral issues on the rate of parental divorce.
Wait, let's make sure we understand the methodology here.
Yeah.
They were looking at the child's DNA markers for these disorders and correlating that with whether the parent's marriage survived.
Yes.
Wow.
And the findings are stark. The higher the child's genetic predisposition for severe behavioral issues, the higher the mathematical risk of the parent's marriage failing.
So the biology actually breaks the marriage.
The disruption the child brings to the environment is so intense that it fractures the marital bond. The data even pinpointed the timing. The mean age of the child when the parents divorced in these high-risk scenarios was around 10.99 years old.
11 years old.
Oh.
Right on the precipice of adolescence. When the physical size of the child makes the aggression physically dangerous to manage,
Right.
I want you, the listener, to really put yourself in the shoes of these families. Imagine living in a home where you cannot have a peaceful dinner, ever.
Sure.
You stop attempting family vacations because a DMDD meltdown in an airport is too traumatizing. You stop inviting friends or neighbors over. The entire family becomes socially quarantined.
Yes, quarantined is the right word.
And the marriage is buckling under the financial cost of therapists and the sheer emotional exhaustion of managing this one child.
The isolation is absolute.
So I have to ask the critical question. When the breaking point is reached, when the parents finally divorce or separate, does that relieve the pressure in the home? Or does the loss of that unified family structure just pour gasoline on the child's behavioral fire?
The data overwhelmingly shows it accelerates the damage.
Really?
A dysregulated child's primary need is stability, even if they fight it. Divorce introduces massive fluidity and chaos into their physical reality.
Right. Moving houses, new schedules.
The research on chaotic home environments demonstrates that frequent relocations, multiple changes in the parents' romantic partners, and the absence of a continuous father figure are incredibly strong predictors of severe depression and aggressive antisocial behavior in the child.
It is the ultimate confirmation of their deepest infancy-era fear. Like, my environment is fundamentally unsafe. People I rely on will leave. I am completely on my own.
And in the wreckage of this family collapse, we have to look at the collateral damage.
The siblings.
The sources refer to them as the glass children. People look right through them to focus on the broken child.
The emotional, social, and financial bandwidth of the family is entirely monopolized by the disruptive child. The siblings suffer from profound, albeit unintentional, neglect.
They just get left behind.
They learn that their own needs are an inconvenience. Some develop deep resentment and jealousy, but more often they are forced into a role of extreme over-responsibility.
They become the caretaker.
Yes, they become hyper-vigilant caretakers trying to manage the parent's stress. This premature adulthood breeds its own distinct pathologies, often manifesting as severe, quiet anxiety or clinical depression. The family unit has essentially detonated. We now have a fractured home, a child entering adolescence with severe, untreated behavioral disorders, a history of insecure attachment, and siblings silently drowning.
It's a very grim picture.
What does this cascade look like when this child becomes an adult? Because this is the transition point where the psychological trauma becomes strictly, terrifyingly physiological.
This is where we examine the CDC's Monumental Research on Adverse Childhood Experiences, or ACEs.
Right.
ACEs encompass direct trauma like physical or emotional abuse and neglect, but crucially, they also measure household dysfunction.
What we just talked about.
Exactly. Witnessing domestic violence, having an incarcerated relative, or going through the parental separation we just described all count as ACEs.
The core finding is a dose-response relationship. The more ACEs you accumulate, the worse your lifelong health outcomes. But it's not just a matter of having bad memories that make you sad. The sources introduce a mechanism called toxic stress. We need to clearly differentiate this from normal stress.
Normal stress is physiological arousal with a clear endpoint. You have a job interview or you narrowly avoid a car accident.
Right.
Your heart rate spikes, your body releases stress hormones, the event resolves, and your system returns to baseline.
But toxic stress is different.
Toxic stress is prolonged, unremitting severe adversity without the buffer of a supportive, regulated adult caregiver.
And this chronic state causes profound neurobiological damage. Let's get into the mechanics. The sources highlight the dysregulation of the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. Think of the HPA axis like the thermostat in your house, but instead of controlling temperature, it controls your fight-or-flight response.
That's a highly accurate analogy. In a healthy system, the thermostat detects a threat, turns on the furnace to pump out stress hormones like cortisol and corticotropin-releasing hormone, or CRH, and then it shuts off when the room is warm, when the threat is gone.
So what happens with toxic stress?
In a child experiencing toxic stress, the sensor on that thermostat melts. The HPA axis gets stuck in the on position.
The furnace never turns off. It is constantly flooding the body with cortisol.
Yes.
It's like putting your car in neutral and pressing the gas pedal to the floor, holding the RPMs in the red permanently. You could do that for a few seconds to merge onto a highway, but if you hold that engine in the red for 10 years, the heat literally warps the gears. The engine destroys itself.
That is exactly what happens biologically.
The psychological stress of childhood trauma literally reshapes the adult's structural biology.
We call this systemic breakdown allostatic load. It's the cumulative wear and tear on the body's systems from mobilizing resources to survive chronic stress.
And we can see this on brain scans, right?
Yes, we can see the physical evidence of this load. Adults with high AC scores show decreased physical volume in the hippocampus. That's the brain region responsible for learning and memory.
It actually shrinks.
We see structural alterations in the amygdala, the fear processing center, even the posterior corpus callosum, the neural bridge that allows the left and right hemispheres of the brain to communicate, is compromised.
The brain is physically scarred, but the damage doesn't stay in the brain. It cascades into the immune system.
Massively. Evolution designed our stress response to prepare us for physical injury, like a predator attack.
Bleeding, basically.
Exactly. So when the HPA axis fires, it triggers inflammatory pathways to prepare the body to heal a physical wound. But a child dealing with a hostile home life isn't bleeding. They're psychologically terrified.
So the body is confused.
The body is pumping out inflammatory markers for a wound that doesn't exist.
And blood tests on adults with high childhood trauma reveal this. They have chronically elevated levels of inflammatory proteins like C-reactive protein, or CRP, and interleukin-6.
IL-6, yes. This state of chronic low-grade inflammation is a direct biological pipeline to adult disease. It damages blood vessels, leading to a drastically higher risk of cardiovascular disease.
Right.
It interferes with insulin resistance, leading to type 2 diabetes. It contributes to severe obesity and alters cellular environments, increasing the risk for certain types of cancer.
The sources also detail a phenomenon called somatization. What is the mechanism behind that?
Somatization occurs when severe psychological distress, devoid of a healthy outlet, manifests as medically unexplained physical symptoms.
Like real pain.
Oh, the pain is intensely real. The patient might suffer from debilitating chronic migraines, severe gastrointestinal pain, or inexplicable joint aches. They go to specialist after specialist, but no doctor can find a localized biological cause.
Because it's not local.
Right. The pathology is rooted in the nervous system. The body is physically bearing the burden of the unhealed emotional trauma.
And the mental destruction tracks right alongside the physical. The data shows adults with high ACE scores have an 8 times higher risk of experiencing dissociative symptoms.
8 times.
Why? Because their brain learned in infancy that when reality is too painful to process, checking out of their physical body is the only viable survival mechanism. They are 4 times more likely to develop PTSD, and the link to substance abuse is devastating.
It returns to that dose-response relationship. The higher the number of childhood traumas, the exponentially higher the likelihood of severe substance abuse.
Any drugs in particular?
The sources highlight a specifically strong correlation with heavy cocaine use. We have to view this not just as reckless behavior, but as a desperate attempt at self-medication.
They're trying to fix the thermostat.
Yes. These individuals are using profound chemical interventions to try and quiet an internal state of chaos they've lived with since they were in a crib.
It is a dark, overwhelming trajectory. But the sources reveal 2 more unseen layers to this cycle that complicate the picture even further. The first is a hidden biological world that blew my mind. The microbiome.
The gut-brain axis is currently one of the most explosive fields of medical research.
Right.
We now understand that the trillions of bacteria in our gut do not just digest food. They actively synthesize neurotransmitters like serotonin and regulate systemic immune responses.
So an unbalanced gut messes up the brain.
Exactly. An unbalanced microbiome triggers the exact kind of chronic inflammation we just linked to mental illness and physical disease.
But here is the specific detail from the clinical sources that stopped me in my tracks. How does a human baby build a healthy, regulated microbiome in the first place? A massive component of it is the physical transfer of microorganisms from the mother to the baby through extended skin-to-skin touch.
The specific bacterial colonies hosted by the mother are physically transferred to the infant's skin and gut. This microbial handoff is essential for training the baby's nascent immune system.
And it helps them bond.
Remarkably, yes. Early research suggests this shared microbiome actively facilitates the biochemical formation of maternal-infant emotional bond.
And the sources draw a stark conclusion here. If a baby is primarily cared for by a secondary caregiver like a nanny, because the parents are working extremely long hours away from the home, the baby is receiving the nanny's microorganisms, not the mother's. It physically alters the biological bonding process. We aren't just talking about a lack of emotional quality time. We're talking about a disruption at a microscopic bacterial level that changes how the child's immune system communicates with their brain.
Which underscores how radically holistic human development is. You cannot neatly separate the biological environment from the psychological one. They are the exact same system.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the final and incredibly tricky layer of this deep dive, the paradox of overdiagnosis.
Right. We spent the last hour meticulously detailing the catastrophic damage that occurs when abnormal behavior is ignored or dismissed. But the pediatric guidelines issue a massive flashing warning light about the exact opposite extreme.
Rushing to slap a clinical label on a child just to get an answer.
Yes. In modern pediatric psychiatry, quickly labeling a child with ADHD, ODD, or DMDD without rigorously examining their environmental context can cause profound, irreversible harm.
Detecting an abnormality does not always benefit the patient if the label itself becomes a weapon.
The sources refer to this as the vulnerable child syndrome. I'd take that a step further. Parents fight for diagnosis to get resources. But once the label is applied, the child is forever viewed through the lens of pathology.
Right.
Even if the child fully recovers or learns to manage their emotional regulation, the parents continue to treat them as fragile and broken.
And think about the implications of what you just said. Society fundamentally changes its perception of the child. A clinical label can rapidly become a self-fulfilling prophecy.
How so?
A child diagnosed with a severe behavioral disorder, or even a highly visible medical label like a severe food allergy, often becomes the target of profound isolation and bullying from peers who sense the vulnerability.
The sources highlight campaigns like It's Not a Joke, which deal with the severe psychological toll of bullying directed specifically at children carrying medical or behavioral labels. The stress of the bullying can trigger the exact inflammatory and HPA cascades we just talked about.
So we're back to the doom loop.
So what does this all mean? How does a parent or a society walk this incredibly fine tightrope?
It's hard.
On one side, if you ignore the tantrums, misinterpret the high IQ irritability, and dismiss the underlying trauma, you set off a cascade that ends in family ruin, divorce, and a child destined for adult chronic disease.
And on the other side,
On the other side, if you rush to pathologize them with a DSM label, you might stigmatize them for life, treating what is actually a desperate trauma response as a purely chemical defect.
it demands a complete paradigm shift in how we view children. True healing requires looking at the holistic ecosystem of the child.
Not just the symptoms.
Exactly. When a toddler is screaming or a 10-year-old is throwing a chair, we have to stop asking, how do I suppress this behavior? And start asking, what is this behavior desperately trying to communicate?
Is it a symptom of a fractured marital dynamic? Is it an insecure attachment strategy? Is it a hypersensitive nervous system reacting to an unseen stressor?
It's about taking the time to decode the flight data recorder instead of just smashing the alarm bell with a hammer to make the noise stop.
I mean, we have to treat the root code, not just the symptomatic output.
Precise.
Let's rapidly recap the narrative through line we've uncovered today.
Yeah.
We start with an infant. Perhaps they are cognitively advanced, hyper-observant, and deeply sensitive.
Right.
They exhibit subtle cues of distress or intense toddler frustration when the world doesn't align with their expectations. If those cues are ignored, met with a still face, or punished as simply bad behavior, the infant develops an insecure attachment strategy to survive.
Their nervous system learns the world is unpredictable and unsafe.
And as they grow, this biological insecurity metastasizes into clinical defiance, ODD, ADHD, DMDD. They employ a coercion cycle, learning that explosive aggression is the only way to control their environment.
Which leads to the family crisis.
This daily warfare strains the family to the breaking point, driving up parental stress, isolating siblings, and ultimately fracturing the parents' marriage.
And the chaos of the resulting divorce pours gasoline on the fire, solidifying the child's toxic stress.
This unbroken allostatic load physically rewires the child's brain, shrinking their hippocampus and mutating their amygdala. It breaks their HPA axis thermostat, permanently flooding their body with cortisol and inflammatory markers like IL-6.
Permanently altering their immune system and microbiome.
Ultimately, this leaves them as adults suffering from severe chronic physical diseases, mental illness, and substance abuse.
It is a devastating, lifelong physiological echo of those earliest missed microinteractions.
And to leave you with one final provocative thought, we have to talk about epigenetics. The scientific literature confirms that traumatic environmental variables, abuse, neglect, the toxic stress of a chaotic divorce cause epigenetic modifications.
These are literal chemical tags, like methyl groups, that attach to our DNA and physically alter how our genes are expressed. They turn certain genetic predispositions on or off.
And the haunting part, the detail that should keep you awake tonight, is that these epigenetic tags can be passed down to subsequent generations. Your trauma can physically alter the baseline biology of a child you haven't even had yet. So, look at the world today. Look at the skyrocketing, unprecedented rates of childhood anxiety, ADHD, autoimmune disorders, and chronic, unexplained inflammation.
It's everywhere.
Could the massive surge in these conditions actually be the biological echo of how our parents and our grandparents were raised?
It really makes you wonder.
It forces you to look at your own family tree, your own nervous system, and your own physical stress responses in a completely new light. When you lose your temper or when your body breaks out in a rash from stress, are you reacting to the present moment? Or are you reacting with the inherited, chemically tagged trauma of the generations before you?
It brings us right back to that desire for an X-ray machine. We all want a clean break, a simple binary diagnosis.
We want to point at a broken arm and say, there is the problem.
Exactly.
But human behavior isn't a broken bone. It is a cascade. And the water has been running for a very, very long time.